Good morning. Good morning. It is the Easter season, or the Christmas season. Easter. We're moving ahead. We're in the Christmas season. We're still in the last Sunday of Advent, and next Wednesday we will have our Christmas Eve service. Today, I want to look at both of our passages today, both from Isaiah and from Matthew. I'm going to start with Isaiah, because this kind of sets the stage, because Matthew is quoting from Isaiah. And we need to understand what Matthew understood about what he was quoting. And so let's look back at Isaiah. In the 700s BC, the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel were not friendly with each other. The northern kingdom was known as Ephraim or Israel, depending on who you're reading or who was writing. It was known by both names. It was also known later as Samaria. So just so we're totally confused, the northern kingdom had three names. It had Israel, it had Israel, it had Samaria, and it had Ephraim. The reason it was called Ephraim at this particular time was because Ephraim, which was one of the grandsons of Joseph back in Egypt. Remember, he had two grandsons. One was named Ephraim and the other one was named Manasseh. And when Joseph went to bless them, he did this kind of thing. Instead of putting his right hand on the eldest, he put his right hand on the youngest, and he put his left hand on the eldest, and he cross-blessed them just like his father did and just like his grandfather had done, blessing the younger over the elder. Well, Ephraim then becomes the chief tribe of the northern kingdom, and the capital city was Samaria, which is also why later the whole region became known as Samaria. But at this time, King Ahaz, who is the king of Judah, he is being confronted by a coalition of Syria and Ephraim, the northern kingdom. And both of them have pushed against Judah and are threatening Judah. And Judah is worried. And here's where Isaiah comes in, because Isaiah says, here is the trouble that you're facing. You are facing destruction. But before that destruction comes, he speaks through Isaiah, he speaks to King Ahaz. And God says to Ahaz, give me a test to prove my power, to prove that I am your God. And Ahaz, who was not a very pious person. We need to recognize that. Ahaz was not a pious person. He followed God, but he wasn't very religious about this sort of thing. And he quotes Deuteronomy by saying, do not put the Lord God to the test. Well, that would be a test if God didn't say, give me something. See, God asked him for a test. And when God asks you for something, you give it. You don't argue with God, which is what Ahaz did. He argued with God. He said, no, I'm not going to put you to the test, even though God said, give me a test. When God says, give you a test, do it. That's the first warning in this story. That's the first thing that it tells us, is when God asks you for a test, then you give God that test. And here's what happened to Ahaz. He turned God down. He said, no, don't put your Lord God to the test. And so Isaiah says, well, okay, fine. God's going to do this anyway. God's going to do to you anyway. And before, there's going to be a child born. Now, there's a lot of speculation about that. There's like 7 different theories about who this child is. The best one, and this is the one I'm going to choose to express today, the best one is that this is going to be a child born to one of Ahaz's wives. And that this child is going to be born. And before this child reaches the age of 12, which is the age when you can determine your own good or evil, is the age of 12. Before this child turns 12, bad things are going to happen. Bad things are going to happen. In fact, it's going to be so bad that what's left is the cattle and the bees. Because you're going to be eating milk curd and honey when this time comes. It's going to be so bad that all that's going to be left are goats and sheep and cattle and honey to eat. All the other food, everything else is going to be gone, be taken away. So here's where Ahaz is. This is where the story comes that Matthew is looking at. Matthew is looking back as, here is a time when there's going to be a massive change, and it's going to come within our lifetime. It's going to come within the next 12 years or so. There's going to be the invasion and the destruction. But before it's all over, it'll all be cleared up. And by the time the child is 12, the age of reason, then it'll all be over and you'll be able to rebuild. Well, as history shows, as Josephus writes about this, and as our actual history books tell us, this is actually what happened. There was a period of time, they were under siege, they finally came in, they conquered Jerusalem, they left Jerusalem kind of in ruins, and Ahaz's son Hezekiah rebuilds the temple years later. So there's a kind of that's the nutshell of what Isaiah is about. Now Matthew, looking from 700, 800 years later, looks back at this and says, I can bring that story forward into our situation today. We're under the siege of the Romans. Things are bad. In fact, things are not looking good at all. There's all these different prophets and anointed ones or messiahs that keep popping up out of the woodwork all over the place. Josephus writes that at the time that Jesus was alive, there were 4 other messiahs, self-proclaimed messiahs in Israel at the time. So, Matthew, looking at his situation, looking at the world he is in, he speaks to Joseph in the story. Now here's a remarkable thing. If we go back and you look at the story of Luke, about 3 months before the Matthew story begins, where the angel appears to Joseph, about 3 months before that, the angel had appeared to Mary. And we find that in the story of Luke, Luke's version of this story. I want you to note that in Luke, the angels never once speak to Joseph. All through that, they speak to Mary. The angel speaks to Mary, and the angel speaks to Elizabeth. In the Matthew story, the angel never speaks to Mary, only speaks to Joseph and the 3 wise men. Oh, take what you want from that, but what we can do is we can see the progression of the story. Follow the Luke story. We have the angel speaking to Mary. About 3 months later, Joseph, who is engaged to this young woman, finds out that she's pregnant. Now, he hasn't, marriage custom at the time is they're married, but a period of time elapses before the husband takes the wife to his home, where then the marriage is consummated. But at this point, that has not occurred. Mary is still living at her home, and Joseph, who is engaged to her, has not actually taken possession of her yet. He hasn't taken her to his home. And so he finds out that she's pregnant. Well, Joseph the story tells us Joseph is a righteous man. The word righteous here should actually be translated a little different. This is a different Greek word than what we normally assume was righteous, meaning God-fearing. It doesn't say that Joseph is not God-fearing, but it does say that Joseph is a righteous man, but the word here is more like he was a kind man. He was a man who showed kindness, who showed care, who wasn't going to just throw her out into the street and make a big ruckus about this. He was going to do this quietly. He wanted to divorce her because she was pregnant, and it wasn't his. And so there were 2 options here that Joseph could use. One of them is that he could release her in public. And that is, he takes her before the court and he says, I want to divorce her because she has committed adultery. And if that comes about, then most likely she'd have been dragged out into the street and stoned or burned or some other form of punishment. But Joseph, the other option is that Joseph could go to 2 witnesses, bring them to his home very quietly, bring these 2 witnesses there with Mary and say, I want to divorce her. He says that 3 times and then bang, it's all done. And they go away. She goes back to her home, her family, and he goes on his way, and he's eligible to remarry. And of course, she'll always live with her family. That's the way it was. And so Joseph had decided he was going to do the quiet method, because he's a kind person. He did not want Mary to go through all that public humiliation and the possibility of being stoned or killed by the people. And so Joseph, being a kind man, decided to divorce her quietly. And as soon as he had made that decision, showing the character of this man, the angel appears to him and says to him, that this child that's born to Mary is special. It's conceived by the Holy Spirit. It's conceived by the blessing and by the Spirit of God. And this child is special. And you're going to name him Jesus. Well, actually, he said you're going to name him Yeshua. Yeshua, Jesus is the Greek version of Yeshua, Joseph. Or Joshua, even, is better. Joshua. So his real name, as we need to understand, is his true name given at birth was Yeshua, which means God saves, or Yahweh saves, or Yah saves. So his name was Yeshua, Joshua. We know him as Jesus. So Joseph names him Jesus, with the mind also that he is also Emmanuel. God is with us during this time of trial. And when that happened back in Isaiah, when Ahaz and Isaiah were in their conversation, and Jesus says, and Isaiah tells him that a child is born, his name is Emmanuel. God is with us. That is with us means that God is going to be with us through this trial, through this next few years of difficulty that we're going to be facing. And that is exactly what Matthew is using in this too. Matthew is telling Joseph, in the story, the angel is telling Joseph that God is with us as we move through these next stages, through these next 70 years of trial and torment that we're going to be going through. And in 70 years, it's actually, Jerusalem is destroyed again, just like in the Isaiah story. Jerusalem is destroyed, the people are scattered, and all kinds of bad things happen. And so these two stories are, in a way, parallel. What I wanted to point out, the whole thing that I'm talking about here, is really I want to focus on Joseph in the story. And Joseph's kindness. And everything that Joseph could have done. He could have put her away. He could have had her stoned. He could have done all kinds of things legally to her. But the kindness of Joseph overlooked everything else. Even the fact that she, in his mind, up to that point where the angel tells him what's going on, he believed that she was probably had been unfaithful to their proposal, their proposed marriage. And so I kind of look to Joseph as, wow, we don't talk much about Joseph. We don't look at Joseph's story, and yet as we follow the Joseph story, we see the angel speaks to him again and warns him of what's going to come, and they end up moving to Egypt, escaping to Egypt. This follows the Joseph story from the Old Testament, and also follows the Joseph story about the flight into Egypt and then the return later. It follows, Matthew is very much putting Jesus in line with a lot of the Old Testament prophets and heroes of the Old Testament. But Joseph is a kind man. I hope that I am like Joseph. I try very hard to be like Joseph, a kind person. So when I see problems or see trouble or see things that happen, I can be kind. When I see somebody in trouble, I can be kind. When I see somebody that has fallen away, I can try to be kind. And I hope that Joseph's life is an example for us on how, no matter how, sometimes as life deals with us, and sometimes as our friends and our family deal with us, we need to find that ability to say, we forgive. We will overlook the trouble. We'll let it go. We'll be kind about this and let it go. And so that's what I encourage you to be like. Be like Joseph. Be forgiving no matter what the trouble is that comes against you. Be caring no matter what kinds of difficulties you face.